Listen closely, because once you hear this, you can never go back. In the hushed corridors of royal history, where the gilded ceilings hide the stench of blood and childbirth, there is a truth almost no one dares to speak aloud. The crowns of kings were forged not in gold, but in the torn bodies of queens. You were told these women were treasured, adored, draped in silks, but in truth, they were the empire's most valuable livestock, traded not for land, but for wombs that could bear sons. Their bodies were currency. Their pain was policy. Picture a marble tomb glowing in the first light of dawn. The world calls it a monument to love. But if you press your ear against its cold walls, you can almost hear the muffled screams of the woman entombed inside, screams from a deathbed soaked in blood after her 14th childbirth. She did not die for love. She died because a dynasty demanded more of her flesh than God himself ever intended a human body to give. This is the part of history they hide behind fairy tales. The pageantry. The coronations. The portraits of smiling queens cradling infants. But what you were never told is that the royal nursery was as much a battlefield as any front line, and the casualties were not only in cradles, but in coffins small enough to carry in one hand. When a queen failed to produce a living son, her value collapsed. Alliances shattered. Wars began. And in the quiet, between the wails of newborns and the prayers over tiny shrouds, the queen herself began to understand, she was not loved. She was owned. Tonight, we descend into the hidden history of the most fertile queens the world has ever known. Women whose names have been polished into legend, yet whose lives were defined by cycles of pregnancy, loss, and political servitude so relentless it carved madness into their souls. You will see the truth they buried, that royal bloodlines were built on the calculated destruction of the women who carried them. And once you see it, you will never look at a crown the same way again. They will tell you these queens were blessed, chosen by God to bring forth the heirs of nations. But the blessing was a lie. In truth, their marriages were contracts written in blood, signed by two kingdoms, and enforced by the slow death of the woman trapped in the center. Her wedding gown was a veil over a prison door. Once it closed, there was no escape except the grave. Consider Queen Anne of England. Her name is whispered in polite history books with pity, the last monarch of the House of Stuart, but what they don't tell you is that she was worked to death by her own court. 17 pregnancies. 17. Not one child lived to inherit her throne. Imagine it, her body swelling with life again and again, only to hold cold silence in her arms at the end. Every miscarriage was dissected like a political autopsy. Every stillbirth entered into official records like a military defeat. Her physicians theorized endlessly, her enemies whispered curses, her allies prayed in desperation, but none of them saw her as human. She was an organ for the state. And when that organ failed, the dynasty gasped its last breath. The vault where she now lies contains more than her body. Around her are the small coffins of 20 lost children, stillborns, infants, little boys and girls whose names were barely spoken before they were buried. It is a kingdom of the dead, and she is its queen. And Anne was not alone. In palaces across Europe, the story repeated itself like a curse. Empresses who ruled empires between contractions. Queens who signed peace treaties while bleeding from childbirth. Women who endured decade-long barrenness under the watchful eyes of men who considered replacing them like a defective piece of property. Behind the smiles in their portraits, there was always the same shadow, fear. Fear that this month's missed cycle would bring celebration, or humiliation. Fear that the child in their womb would be born too early, too late, too weak, or the wrong gender, and that their survival depended on something they could not control. You have been told to admire the crowns, the jewels, the glory. But I will show you the cost. And once you know that price, you will start to see every royal marriage in history for what it truly was, not romance, but the cold machinery of power, lubricated with blood. They call it the Taj Mahal, the greatest monument to love. A masterpiece of marble, flawless as a prayer carved in stone. But when you stand before it, you must understand, it is not a love story. It is a mausoleum built on the broken body of a woman who died fulfilling the unspoken contract of queenship, to give her husband as many heirs as her body could produce, until it killed her. Mumtaz Mahal was the favorite wife of Shah Jahan. In the empire's courtly poetry, she was the chosen one of the palace, the jewel of his heart. In reality, that title was a sentence. While his other wives bore him a single child each, Mumtaz was forced into 14 pregnancies over 19 years. 7 children survived. 7 were carried out of her chambers wrapped in white cloth before they could ever cry. Her body was never allowed to heal. She traveled with the emperor even on military campaigns, heavy with child, enduring weeks on rough roads because a favorite wife could not be left behind. On June 17, 1631, in a stifling chamber hundreds of miles from the capital, she labored for 30 hours with her 14th child. By the end, the linens beneath her were soaked through, the walls echoing with her cries. She died from postpartum hemorrhage, a condition that, with today's medicine, could have been stopped in minutes. But in the 17th century, a queen could bleed to death while her attendants whispered prayers and the empire waited for news of the baby. Her death broke Shah Jahan's heart, or so the story goes. He built the Taj Mahal to honor her. But think about that for a moment. That towering white dome was not built to spare her life. It was built to immortalize her death. A palace of mourning, yes, but also a monument to the system that killed her, the same system that continued to grind women into the dust for the sake of dynasties. Every stone of the Taj Mahal is stained with a truth they will not tell you. Mumtaz Mahal's love was not her greatest gift to the emperor, her womb was. And when it could give no more, her value ended. The crown weeps marble tears for her, but the empire never stopped demanding more women like her to feed its bloodline. Maria Theresa of Austria, the only woman to rule the Habsburg dominions in her own right, is remembered as a fierce monarch, a strategist, a stateswoman. But beneath the armor of her political legend was a body that was never hers to command. 16 children in 18 years. 1 pregnancy every 13 months. While kings measured their victories in land and treaties, her victories were measured in living offspring, and her defeats in miscarriages no one dared speak of outside palace walls. The court called her pregnancies, proclamations, political announcements that rippled across Europe, shifting alliances like chess pieces. The moment she carried life, she became more valuable than gold. But there was no pause between her duties as empress and her duties as broodmare. She negotiated treaties while swollen with child, attended military briefings between contractions, and signed orders for war while bleeding from childbirth. It was not multitasking. It was state-sanctioned possession of her body, her schedule, her very breath. And these children were not born into a mother's arms, they were born into the game. Her sons were heirs, warriors, bargaining chips. Her daughters were pawns in dynastic marriages, their personal happiness traded away for the strength of the empire. One was sent to France to become Marie Antoinette, and to die beneath the guillotine. Another, once famed for her beauty, was scarred by smallpox and discarded from the marriage market like damaged goods. Maria Theresa's reign is celebrated for its reforms, its administrative brilliance, its resilience. But no one celebrates the toll it took to produce that many heirs while holding an empire together. Every child she birthed was a double-edged blade, another strand in the Habsburg web of power, and another drain on her body, her time, her life. We admire her iron will, her political genius, her ability to dominate the courts of Europe. But the truth is, her empire was not just built with military campaigns and royal decrees. It was built with her own blood, her sleepless nights, her split body. 16 births were not a quirk of history, they were the price for her throne. And that price was demanded by a system older than any crown, the belief that a queen's worth was measured not in wisdom or warcraft, but in the number of children she could survive bringing into the world. Catherine de Medici entered France draped in silk and expectation. She was the niece of a pope, married to the future King Henry II, and carried the weight of 2 kingdoms in her womb. Except for 10 long years, her womb stayed empty. In a royal court, a barren queen is not merely pitted, she is a loaded gun with no bullet. Every month without conception was another whisper in the corridors, "Replace her." Every formal dinner was a silent trial in which her worth was weighed and found wanting. Physicians probed her body as if searching for a broken gear. Court gossip speculated on her health, her virtue, even her loyalty. The king's mistress, the older, cunning Diane de Poitiers, tightened her grip over Henry, wielding power Catherine could not touch without an heir to give her leverage. Desperation is a dangerous alchemy. Catherine swallowed mule's urine on a doctor's advice, smeared her body with concoctions of cow dung and ground stag antler, wore charms, prayed at relics, and endured the humiliations of a court obsessed with her barrenness. Every failed attempt was not just personal sorrow, it was a political earthquake. Kings had cast off queens for less. Then, in 1544, she finally delivered a son. The court erupted in relief, as if a war had been won. Over the years, she would bear 10 children, 7 of whom survived, but those barren years had already carved deep scars in her mind. She had learned what it meant to be replaceable, expendable, an object whose sole value lay in reproduction. She had learned that power in the royal court was not granted to queens for love, or wisdom, or loyalty, it was traded for children, and could be revoked at any moment. That knowledge hardened her. When Henry died and her sons took the throne one by one, she ruled behind them with the cold precision of someone who had spent a decade fighting for her survival in a gilded cage. Catherine became the architect of alliances, the manipulator of factions, the silent hand behind France's most ruthless decisions. They call her a schemer, a poisoner, a shadow queen. But they forget the truth, the poison was not in her cup. It was in the system itself, and she simply learned to drink it without dying. Eleanor of Aquitaine was not just a queen, she was a kingdom in human form. Her land stretched across France, her beauty was legend, and her marriages tied her to 2 of the most powerful thrones in Europe. Yet all of it, all the castles, the titles, the armies, was secondary to the only thing that truly mattered to the men who ruled her life, what her womb could deliver. Her first marriage was to Louis VII of France. She bore him 2 daughters, Marie and Alix. In any other life, this would have been enough. But in the world of crowns, 2 daughters meant 2 failures. The union was annulled, the official reason shrouded in piety, the real reason whispered openly, no sons. 2 months later, she wed Henry Plantagenet, the future King Henry II of England. This time, her womb delivered what the throne demanded, 5 sons and 3 daughters. Sons who would become kings, daughters who would become bargaining chips. She had fulfilled her purpose. And once that purpose was exhausted, she discovered the truth every queen eventually learns, a fruitful womb may buy you safety, but only temporarily. When her sons rebelled against Henry in 1173, she backed them, perhaps believing they would grant her the respect their father had withheld. Henry's response was brutal. He had her captured and imprisoned for nearly 16 years. The queen who had given him an empire was reduced to a prisoner in her own lands. She was released only when Henry died, her usefulness resurrected now that she could help secure the succession for her surviving sons. Eleanor's story is held up as one of triumph, a queen who survived decades of political storms, who shaped the destinies of kings. But strip away the romance, and you see a woman whose body was a battlefield, whose children were pawns, and whose own freedom was a luxury granted or revoked at the whims of men. Her fertility forged dynasties, but it did not protect her from betrayal. It merely delayed it. And this is the unspoken law of royal bloodlines. Once the womb has served its purpose, the queen is no longer indispensable. She becomes an asset to be locked away, discarded, or buried. Queen Victoria is painted in history as the matriarch of Europe, the grandmother of kings, the smiling figure whose children and grandchildren sat on thrones across the continent. But beneath that image lies a truth soaked in fatigue, resentment, and a legacy of suffering carried in the very blood she passed on. Between 1840 and 1857, Victoria gave birth to 9 children. That is not a number, that is a campaign. A constant, unbroken cycle of pregnancy, childbirth, and recovery, with only fleeting months in between. She hated it. In her private letters, she described pregnancy as being, like a dog or a cow, a humiliating reduction from sovereign to breeding animal. Yet her hatred did not matter. The empire's stability, the dynasty's future, the political chessboard of Europe, all demanded that she continue. During each confinement, Prince Albert effectively became regent, handling state affairs while she lay in bed. This was not rest, it was enforced absence, stripping her of the authority she had been born to wield. After each birth came exhaustion, postnatal depression, unrecognized in her time, and the suffocating knowledge that it was only a matter of months before she would be pregnant again. The marriages of her children were not love matches but political deployments. Each son and daughter was sent into another royal house to strengthen alliances, spread influence, and secure peace, or at least the illusion of it. But Victoria carried within her blood a hidden curse, the gene for hemophilia. She passed it to several of her children, and from them it seeped into the royal families of Russia, Spain, and Germany. Princes bled to death from minor injuries, their mothers watching helplessly as the same crown that had elevated them now sat atop a house rotting from within. Victoria's 9 children became her legacy, but they also became her chains. The web of alliances she created could not prevent the world wars that tore Europe apart. The blood she spilled in childbirth became the same blood spilled in trenches and palaces a generation later. History calls her a great monarch. But the truth is, her reign was shadowed by the same unbreakable law as every queen before her. The crown's survival came first, and the queen's body was simply the vessel through which it would be secured, no matter the cost. Blanche of Castile understood something most queens never lived long enough to learn, that in a world ruled by men, survival meant becoming more dangerous than the threats around you. She bore 12 children to King Louis VIII of France. Half of them died. The other half became living pieces in a high-stakes game of political survival. When Louis died suddenly in 1226, Blanche was left a widow at 38, with a 12-year-old son about to inherit the throne. In that moment, the vultures descended. The French barons saw a child king as an opportunity. They would control him, rule through him, and if necessary, remove him. But Blanche moved faster. She had her son crowned within a month of his father's death, forcing every noble in attendance to swear loyalty, not to the boy, but to her. From that day forward, she was a queen regent who fought wars in armor and waged politics with the precision of a blade. She negotiated with England's armies, not with meekness but with calculation, buying peace when it served her, breaking it when it didn't. Every surviving child was a resource. A daughter could be married off to secure an alliance. A son could be placed in a strategic duchy. Nothing, and no one, was beyond use. But the cost was immense. She buried 6 children and never allowed herself the collapse of grief. She carried the weight of a kingdom on her back while her heart rotted from loss. In her later years, her health failed, but she ruled until her last breath because stepping away meant everything she had built could be undone in an instant. You must understand, Blanche's power was not given to her, it was taken, seized in moments when hesitation meant death. She became a weapon because she had no choice. And that is the truth they hide from you, queens were never safe. Not in life. Not even in their victories. If you have followed me this far into the shadows, then write this in the comments twice to mark the moment you crossed the threshold. The crown is paid in blood. Let it echo, so the algorithm, and every man who reads it, knows you see the truth now. By now, you understand, the wombs of queens were not private, sacred spaces. They were factories. State-owned, state-monitored, and state-controlled. Each pregnancy was an investment. Each child a form of currency. Each death, a political loss measured not in tears but in treaties broken. Across centuries, from palaces in Europe to courts in Asia, the machinery was the same. The queen's cycle was tracked like the movement of an army. Physicians, astrologers, and ministers hovered over her body, waiting for signs of conception. The moment she quickened, the news was carried like a war victory, for it was war, just of a different kind. And when the child was born, it was never truly hers. The heir belonged to the crown, the spare to the realm, and the daughters to the marriage market. Think of the sheer scale, generations of royal women spending nearly every year of their reigns pregnant or recovering from pregnancy. The endless physical toll, torn bodies, malnutrition, hemorrhage, infection, matched only by the psychological one. A queen could survive assassins and armies, but one stillbirth could destroy her politically. That is why portraits show smiling mothers surrounded by plump, healthy children. The truth behind the canvas was often a nursery half empty, the silence of missing voices drowned out by the necessity to appear victorious. And here is the darkest truth of all, the system never needed these women to survive for long. It needed them only long enough to produce the next generation of heirs. Once their bodies were too damaged, too old, or politically irrelevant, they could be sidelined, divorced, imprisoned, or quietly erased from history. This was not cruelty by accident, it was design. It is tempting to pity these women. But pity is not enough. What they endured was not an unfortunate side effect of royal life, it was the engine that powered it. The bloodlines that still exist today were forged in this crucible of suffering, and the crowns we still admire were bought with centuries of deliberate, institutionalized exploitation. And that is why I am telling you this, because when you look at any royal lineage, any dynasty, any so-called glorious reign, you must strip away the gold and the marble until you see the truth underneath. It is not beauty. It is not romance. It is the echo of labor pains in candlelit chambers, and the sound of history stepping over the women who died to make it. Close your eyes. Imagine the coronation of a king, the trumpets, the cheers, the gold cloth glittering in the sun. But now, tilt your vision downward. Past the throne. Past the jewels. Down into the vaults beneath the palace, where the air is colder, heavier. Down there, the truth waits. Stone corridors lined with coffins, some the size of your hand. Others large enough to hold the bodies of women who died before their crowns lost their shine. This is the real foundation of royal power, not marble, not gold, but bone. Every dynasty you have ever studied rests on this hidden graveyard. The names carved into stone are not always remembered, because remembering them means admitting what was done. The fairy tales omit the screaming. The paintings erase the blood. History books praise the heirs but bury the mothers twice, once in the ground, and again in silence. You were taught to believe in destiny, in divine right, in noble bloodlines stretching back through time. But noble blood is not born noble. It is taken. Ripped from the veins of women who were told it was their duty, their honor, their sacred purpose. And when their bodies failed, the crown found another. That is the secret you were never meant to hear. That every coronation is a performance staged on top of a mass grave. That every king's first breath was purchased with the risk of his mother's last. And that the system, whether draped in medieval banners or modern suits, still works the same way: demand, take, discard, replace. The next time you see a crown in a glass case, do not look at the diamonds. Look at the spaces between them. See if you can imagine the shadows of those who paid the true price. And remember this: the crown is not heavy because of the gold. It is heavy because of the dead. You have descended with me into the vaults. You have seen what lies beneath the beauty. The question now is not whether you believe it, it is what you will do with it. Because once you know this truth, you carry it. And once you carry it, you are no longer just a spectator to history. You are its witness.